Alright guys, on to penicillin. So I'm going to quickly run through magic bullets and how that was created. So hopefully keep this one a little bit shorter. Again, I'm just going through the content, so just make notes as you go. Right, so penicillin you get prescribed from the doctor. It's very much used as an antibiotic, but we're going to have a look at how that developed. When it first appeared, it was seen as like a magic bullet because it worked in the same way, but because it is grown from mold, it's seen as an antibiotic, and that's because loads of people were dying from simple cuts and scratches, and it was this infection, Staphylococcus, and they couldn't get a magic bullet for it, and penicillin was the answer to that. Again, first antibiotic medicine, and since the 40s it saved many lives. I'm gonna go through what penicillin is, but first I'll just go over magic bullets. So what are magic bullets? Well, they're chemical cures that would attack the microbes in the body that cause the disease, whilst also importantly leaving the body unharmed. Basically, in the late 19th century, more microbes responsible for the specific diseases were being discovered. So that meant that scientists could start to begin to search for substances to attack and destroy these microbes. Doctors kind of understood that the body produces antibodies to fight diseases that had previously infected it. So hence how vaccines kind of work. So they started hunting for artificial or chemical antibodies that would basically work in the same way, attacking the infection without harming the body. I mean, it was really a scientist called Paul Ehrlich who tested these arsenic compounds to find a cure for syphilis, and by the 1907 he tested over 600 compounds but hadn't found any. I mean, arsenic could destroy the disease, but the problem with arsenic being so poisonous, it would attack the body as well. In 1909, we get a Japanese scientist named Hata, H-A-T-A, who retested these compounds and found that a compound number 606 cured syphilis. So this drug was named Salvarsan 606, and this became the first magic bullet. So do make a note of that. Salvarsan 606, first magic bullet, chemical compound used to destroy syphilis. You know, but things moved on from there. So in 1932, Gerhard Domag, D-O-M-A-G-K, let me double check that. Yeah, D-O-M-A-G-K. He discovered that the bright red dye called Prontosil killed bacterial infections in mice. So he forced basically to test on Prontosil on his own daughter who had developed blood poisoning, and it cured her. So the use of Prontosil again also was used as a cure for puerperal fever at Queen Charlotte's Maternity Hospital. So this is how it's progressing. Scientists at the Pasteur Institute as well in Paris, they discovered that Prontosil worked by preventing the bacteria from multiplying in the body. Again, this made it possible for the body's own immune system to kill the bacteria. So these drugs were called bacteriostatic antibiotics. So this is kind of how it's progressing. Scientists, again, they continue to look for different drugs that worked in the same way. In 1938, we get scientists developing MMB 693. This was another bacteriostatic antibiotic, which was successfully used to treat kind of Winston Churchill for pneumonia. So again, there's a few things we can note down in progression of magic bullets. In terms of knowing that level of detail, not essential, just Make sure you know in things like Salvarsan 606, even Prontosil. It'll help with evidence, and most importantly, that there was nothing like this before these magic bullets, which shows why it's so important to progression. But I'm just going to read you the story, I think, of Fleming. It's the best way for me to read, the best way I kind of learned it, and it's just kind of, you know, what happens at the start, middle, end kind of thing. So Fleming himself, how did he discover penicillin? Well, he was working on a way to deal with the bacteria he had seen infecting soldiers in France in World War One. So in 28, he found what he was looking for. He was working in St Mary's Hospital, London, and he went on holiday. Basically, leaves a pile of petri dishes containing bacteria on his laboratory bench. When he came back, he noticed there was mold on one of the dishes. Around the mold, the bacteria had kind of disappeared. Fleming kind of carried out experiments with penicillin mold on living cells, making a list of the germs it killed, and it did not seem to work on deeper infections and took time to make enough to use, because it was only a tiny amount of the penicillin mold. Penicillin in the mold, so you had to produce vast amounts of mold to get a little bit of penicillin. He basically writes about it in a medical journal, but nobody really thought it was important, and it kind of gets pushed to one side. So Fleming, very significant in discovering it, albeit by accident, and then writing up his journal, but there it lies until we get Florey & Chain. So Florey & Chain, they were researching these germs and how germs could be killed, and in fact came across Fleming's article. They sought funding, but were only given about £25 as World War II was starting. So they go to America, because America were out of this war at that moment. Florey & Chain discovered that penicillin worked on mice, but to treat people you needed huge quantities, so they started growing them in these big vats. They did test it on a policeman called Albert Alexander, who developed septicemia, and he began to recover, but when they ran out of penicillin, it kind of he died. So you know, the really Florey & Chain, their research and trials in developing penicillin really points the way to what we have today. So do think about that when you are comparing Fleming and Florey & Chain, because, you know, if you're using them in separate paragraphs, you need to be saying which one do you think was more important. You could argue from both sides. So, you know, without Fleming, Florey & Chain would never even had the research to begin with. However, without Florey & Chain, would penicillin ever have been developed? So think about how you're forming your argument there. Right, so how does it progress? Well, Florey & Chain basically need to mass produce it, but because of the war, the English factories were struggling. So America, they basically realised that penicillin could be huge for treating soldiers. They basically provide loans to buy the equipment. Some British firms get involved, and penicillin was started to be produced in huge doses and was treating soldiers on D-Day. And after the war, penicillin began to be manufactured by everyone, started to be mass produced. So you look at this wonder drug, as they say, and how important it really was in the long term. Right, just a little bit on what factors led to the development of penicillin. So you've got the institutions, in particular America, giving them the funding. The technology, so you've got the new petri dishes, you've got able to mass produce to really make penicillin worthwhile. Attitudes, so obviously this really comes off the First World War, a need to help with infection. You've got the individuals, again, Fleming, Florey & Chain. You put emphasis on which one you believe was more important, especially in a judgment question, and that will pick you up the marks. Right, just to finish off, so penicillin is basically effective in treating diseases caused by certain family of bacteria. It's also used to prevent infection as well, particularly with patients who've had the teeth extracted. The development encouraged scientists to basically look at molds as well that could fight bacterial infections. So it's really a jumping off point. So Dorothy Hodgkin was somebody who mapped the chemical structure of penicillin, and scientists were able to begin working on synthetic versions of it. So this is just more of the development there. Again, this would push the research into medical treatments and antibiotics. However, in terms of the long term, some bacteria have started to become resistant, some people are allergic, so there are downsides to it, but yeah, nonetheless, penicillin quite important. Right, well, I'll leave it there. So that's just a run through the story of penicillin. There's great BBC bite-sized videos on this one, so please check it out and look at Student Pod as well. All right, bye.